Chea went to her bed, leaving Yunsu standing there, surprised by his own thoughts. She told him to get it over with, calling him a stupid mosquito. Yunsu stared at her, thinking that there was just no way it could be true. He stepped closer, convincing himself that he only wanted her blood and that she was just amusing to mess with. As he scratched her neck and began to drink, he kept telling himself that this was the only reason, that he shouldn't think about anything else, that he didn't have any feelings. But then suddenly he saw rose vines wrapping around his leg, slowly creeping up toward his neck. Chaya called out for him to stop, and the vision vanished. Yunsu was left bewildered. What was that hallucination just now? Why had he seen it? He turned his head toward Chaya, and as he looked at her, a realization struck him. He stared at her in silence, finally understanding why he'd been so reluctant to let her get close. He hadn't wanted to admit it, but it wasn't just her blood that he wanted. It was Han Chaya herself. Both of them woke up exhausted the next day, weighed down by memories of the previous night. Chea was dying from embarrassment, though she couldn't remember everything clearly. She wondered what exactly she had done that even Yunsu had looked surprised. The thought of him knowing something he could use against her made her even more frustrated. Deciding she couldn't face him, she resolved to stay in her room all day. However, later in the evening, she finally stepped out and ran into Gurim. She asked him where Park Yunsu was, and Gurim replied that he hadn't come out of his room at all. Chea thought to herself that this was good. Then Gurim suddenly asked if she had been drinking last night. When she admitted that she had, he looked surprised and asked if it had been with Yunsu. He then remarked that it must have been tough for Yunsu since she acts like a dog whenever she drinks. Chea immediately became flustered by his comment. She walked into the kitchen, only to find Yunsu already standing there, her face turned completely red at the sight of him. Embarrassed and frustrated, she shot Gurim a glare, demanding an explanation, but he simply shrugged and remarked that maybe Yunsu had gotten thirsty. Yunsu, appearing perfectly calm, asked what they had been talking about. Gurim, ignoring Chea's reaction, casually asked Yunsu if something had happened last night. Yunsu glanced at Chea. She hesitated before asking what exactly she had done. Noticing that she didn't remember, Yunsu simply smiled and said, "Nothing." Chea froze. That answer only confirmed her worst fears. She had definitely done something. She sat down and asked Gurim to make her some food, but he refused, saying that she should do things for herself sometimes. She reminded him that he was the one who banned her from cooking in the first place because she was terrible at it. Gurim, however, turned to Yunsu and suggested that he should be the one to help her. Since he was getting blood from her, he should at least have some conscience. Without giving them a chance to argue, Gurim quickly left, leaving the two of them alone in the kitchen. But Gurim had another reason for leaving them alone. He wanted to secretly enter Yunsu's room. Once inside, he accessed the computer and began searching for information on Rose Gray. Gurim discovered that Rose was a famous painter. Realizing that he needed to meet her to gather more information, he decided to send her an email. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, Yunsu told Chea not to bother helping since she was of no use anyway. Despite his dismissive words, he couldn't help but glare at her. When their eyes met, an awkward tension settled between them, and they both quickly looked away. Chea felt irritated by the whole situation, while Yunsu found himself even more unsettled. He couldn't shake the feeling and, despite himself, glanced at her again. As she walked past him, their arms brushed against each other. Without thinking, Yunsu suddenly grabbed her, his mind racing. What am I even doing? He questioned whether this was just instinct or if something within him had changed. Chea immediately noticed that his eyes had turned yellow. Just then, Gurim returned, and Yunsu quickly released her before walking off without a word. Still confused, Chea turned to Gurim and asked if he could smell any blood on her. When he said no, she frowned and muttered that she thought Park Yunsu was losing his mind. Elsewhere, Rose saw Gurim's email and, smiling, commented that it was silly.